Next to Will is Bill Powers, the president of the University of Texas at Austin, where Bill has been president of UT Austin since 2006. He previously served as the dean of the law school at UT, and some of you who follow politics may be familiar with something called the Powers Report, which was the report on the Enron Corporation, which was an effort chaired by Bill. Bill's leadership in Texas on these issues of increasing attainment, increasing the productivity of higher education has been extraordinary, and he has done so, in my opinion, not only in Texas, but increasingly on a national level by essentially encouraging his colleagues in the best, the most selective, the flagship institutions in this country to get in the game of productivity of higher education.
You know, productivity happens at a lot of places. We want our individual faculty and students to be more productive, departments, campuses, systems of community colleges. One place that we haven't really engaged the statewide or system-wide or even national networks together and sort of meld them into what's going on the campuses. And that's really what you're doing and leading. So I think that in and of itself, even aside from the particular ideas that y'all come up with, has been a real advance in productivity. So thanks for all that. Let me just focus on two things on our campus. They're really kind of conditions on the campus. Then we can get back into some of the more details as we talk. One of them is we've been at this for a long time. And part of that was just, if not accidental, but coincidental. Every 25 years, we invite a committee, commission. 75 years, 100 years, we about, 8 years ago had our 125th anniversary, and we had the commission of 125. Citizens, mostly alumni, but not all alumni, who came to the campus and spent 2 years with us on what are the things you ought to be doing over the next 25 years. And they issued a report. It had a number of very good suggestions, but it had two things it focused on. And one of them was what they called reform the undergraduate curriculum. What it really meant, and what we all meant, was re-energize undergraduate education, which was, I wouldn't say broken, but it was in need of some repair and renovation and reform. And I actually had the honor, I was the dean of the law school at the time, of chairing the task force that tried to go to work on that. And the commission and also the task force realized this is something that needs to be embedded into the culture of the campus. And so we, for a number of reasons, but this reason as well, established a School of Undergraduate Studies that was the guardian of this kind of effort. It embedded onto the campus that this is an ongoing project that was a fun and cooperative interaction with these 125 citizens. So we started in a what I call non-threatening way. That has helped us enormously. And the fact that then we even plan to reform that over a 10-year period, step by step and brick by brick, got this process onto the campus in a non-threatening way. That has been enormously useful for us when we then hit budget cuts. As you say, there are very controversial political issues surrounding this, that the effort was embedded into the campus. I don't want to say there aren't bumps and bruises and setbacks, but I think that is incredibly important, including on the productivity notion, that everybody at every level is saying it's not just the sort of leaders and business people, but it's everybody's job to kind of work productivity into the sort of the fabric of the institution. The second thing that is going to sound and may be very dull, but I think it's very critical to productivity if we look at it in the aggregate and are really trying to move needles. And it's we have a bit of a headwind on our campus. We are a very high cost provider of degrees because it's expensive education. I will brag that among AAU universities, we're a very low-cost provider of flagship research university education. But that is a high-cost tranche in the educational system. That's really part of the motivation. It would be easy for our costs to just skyrocket, and we can't let that happen. There's a future at, I think, in a lot of governmental organizations, a lot of big organizations, I think in a lot of higher ed organizations, that you have long-term planning groups that set out goals and strategies, and then somebody else does the budget. And one of the things we've done is we never do that. We meld budget and strategy together. So we've set up a process on the campus where all the way down from departments to deans to provosts to the president, we meld those together and ask the question, if this is your next dollar, is that where you'd invest it? And what's the rate of return on that? If it's on the research side, there are some units and exercises and investments that have huge research returns and others, frankly, that don't. And then on the teaching side, there are a lot of ideas out there about reforming teaching and student success. There are only so many dollars that we have to invest in this. And we constantly ask, are we investing, is next dollar into one of Harrison's projects going to move the needle more than more advising or more instructors in a particular field? That is a very hard thing to inculcate into an academic setting. We've actually put together some coalitions of community colleges, flagships, regional four-year colleges, other flagships in the state to start to work on some of these problems. I think there's starting to be a recognition that there are some problems like articulating between community colleges and four-year colleges. High school, we're working with high schools. It's getting the whole ecosystem to work better is a drag on productivity, and in some ways that's the good news, because if you address it, you can move the needle.
So let's talk about inculcating these things into cultures, and particularly the faculty piece.
Getting the faculty on board and involved is critical. They are the value producers, by the way, and the students. Right? The students aren't just consumers, they're producers of this product. A lot of the outcomes and results depend on choices that students make as well. So getting that community involved is critical. And I just mentioned a couple of things. One, I mentioned before, it's like compound interest. It works over time. It has to be done over a period of time, so when a new idea comes up, you don't have stakeholders like faculty or students thinking, this is coming from left field, we better look askance at this. And I'd go back to our original curriculum reform, which did have many of these pushback and things of that sort. But you get successes, and now the kinds of things that we're doing, getting freshmen into research projects, which hugely improves their success later in life, transforming our gatekeeper courses. Faculty look back and say, those folks had ideas 8 years ago that we thought were threatening, and they turned out okay. The attempt is to sustain them with volunteerism. So we had freshman seminars. The idea of big university, everybody thinks you'll never see a full professor until you're a junior or a senior. Not true, but that's the sense. All big classes in the first year. It's terrible to have people show up the first year at a big university and they're not in a small class of some sort. So freshman seminars, how did they get worked out? People volunteered to do them. People who were committed to making the undergraduate experience better volunteered to do them. That is an unsustainable model. You cannot live off the kindness of strangers forever. So put budget into undergraduate studies. They buy off the professors from the department. Faculty like to teach the classes. Department gets money to go off and then not replace the person as a faculty member, but replace the course. It gives them the opportunity maybe to do it in a more cost-effective way. It may give them the opportunity to go out and hire an additional faculty member. But it's having a business practice that puts the budget into these reforms. So the faculty are being pulled into them, not just doing it over as volunteers. And so now as we're getting to more complex and frankly more difficult kinds of reforms, like blended online cognitive science redesign of many of our gateway courses, there are enough faculty who are very excited about doing this. The idea that faculty aren't interested in innovation in the educative process, many are, most are. They take this very seriously. But now it's attractive to them because they're being pulled into it, because we're putting budget behind it. So there's no way to get around the notion. You can't go to the faculty and just say, do this as an overload or out of altruism or being a good citizen. The third thing that is absolutely critical, and this is a headwind that many research universities, at least now, are running into. When we're talking about the kinds of things that we've been talking about here and what we talk about in our coalition and throughout the state and other AAU universities, there's actually quite a bit of enthusiasm for this. But a lot of this discussion is lazy faculty doing worthless stuff. A lot of the national discussion, is it worth going to college? Why are we teaching philosophy? Back to the comment, do we need another article on Shakespeare? Et cetera, et cetera. Frivolous research. The faculty will dig their heels in on that. I think rightly so. This is making it more difficult to go through serious reform on campuses. So certainly for campus leaders, there's a big difference by you're just droning on in some lecture hall and students are going to sleep is not going to attract faculty into the enterprise. Think of how much richer your course could be if you have an online component that has interaction with you and you're seeing how they are learning in the class and can come back in the next session and refer to that and move ahead. That kind of approach says, what they're doing is valuable. You're trying to actually make a capital investment to make them more productive at what they are doing. So the political tone of this is critical in engaging the faculty.
Before we open up to questions and comments from the audience, you both have alluded to the legislative and political environment. Bill, I know you've been having a lot of fun with politics and in relationship to your work. So there's challenges and headwinds, but maybe some good things that are happening or hopeful things possible as well. But I just wanted to hear a little bit more about the legislative and political environments in which you work and how you try to negotiate that and what you're dealing with, what you're hopeful about. Hopefully there's something that you're hopeful about in there.
Yeah. Well, let me say the political environment that I work with is actually one of the most positive aspects, and is the tailwind, not the headwind. There is a real sense in our legislature and the legislative leaders that coming to grips with sustainable, and by the way, I mean, what you just talked about and what you asked is the key, right? It's got to be sustainable over a period of time. That there is a very serious recognition in our legislative leadership in favor of that. In fact, our chair of our higher education committee from in the House of Representatives is here, Chairman Branch. But that's an indication there are people in our legislature who care deeply and who know a great deal about the sort of policy wonk, sort of data and all. So that is a real plus. Building that coalition, I think, is critical, and that takes time. You're talking about sustainability. I think that's the key. Whether it's the business models, it's having the faculty think that these changes are fit into their life dreams in some way, right? That yes, they'll make sacrifices and they don't get to do exactly what they want, but their overall life dreams are being sustained because they want student success, right? We need to capture that together. But building this coalition at the legislative level, at least for public university or alumni level, is critical. With legislators and alumni groups, it's not having a policy debate up here and then faculty down here trying to implement stuff. That has to be organized and connected, and that's I'd say that's actually quite healthy in Texas. But we will, I think, not be able to sustain this reform movement if this sort of other political debate, it's worthless to go sit and learn about Shakespeare, or it's worthless to be doing research in quantum mechanics or something like that. We've got to, as you say, get the faculty to see this and the students to see this as part of their life dream, and they'll reform it. As I said, the legislative side for us is there's not enough money to go around. But coming back to this theme of sustainability, one of the things that legislatures have a very hard time doing is long-term commitment over a period of time. The election cycle is 2 years. You can't bind the next legislature. So on things like, for example, capital funding and having a 10-year capital funding plan, 15-year capital funding plan that's going to alter with the economy, but nevertheless what a long-term plan is. It's very hard for legislators to do that. And it's very hard for legislators to focus and say no to stuff and say yes to other stuff and be discriminating so it gets its rate of return. Do we need to put more into the community colleges right now? Do we need to put more into the flagships or into student success or into whatever it is? Those are very hard things in a democracy to do in a legislature. So the structure of how the legislature goes about this can be very important. And again, I'd say we are blessed in Texas by legislative sessions looking 6 years out and saying we can't fund that yet, but let's set up a structure. We have a plan for emerging research universities. Not that much money was available to go into it 2 years ago, and certainly more challenging this year. But nevertheless, the structure was set up with the mindset this will take place over time. And that, frankly, just takes leadership in the legislature. We're lucky to have it, both in our Senate and in the House of Representatives, as I just mentioned a moment ago. And then the talented legislative leaders need to be interested in higher education, right? And you do that by getting them involved, again, like faculty, over a long period of time, so that the leadership in the legislature says, that's what I want to focus on, education, whether at the K-12 level, at the higher education level. So a lot of the things that you see on campuses, the same thing happens in legislatures to make sure that they see that this is something that they want to spend long-term planning over. And as I said, we've been pretty well blessed with that in Texas.
Okay, so I think we've looked at a lot of different angles here on these topics. I'd like to open it up and see what comments and questions the folks in the audience might have.
Any measure of productivity requires some measure of outcome of what it is that you're measuring productivity against. And Dr. Glasper, you mentioned tying resources to outcomes. I'm interested in what outcomes you're tying those resources to. And Dr. Powers, in the same vein, you talked about moving the needle, the next dollar of investment, asking departments, how will this dollar of investment move the needle? And the examples you gave about in terms of that needle were, does this bring more instructors, more advising, which I don't think of as being outcomes. Yeah. So that's the general question for both of you.
I would say that was an investment in an input. That's not the, advising isn't the output. Yeah. Let me say, I think the question you're raising is maybe the most important about this whole idea of productivity. And frankly, it is at the heart of what I'd say is the more unpleasant part of the political debate. We're in the long, if I could just back up a bit, we are odd institutions. We take 18 to 22-year-olds who are at a productive stage of their life, and we let the field life fallow. Right? We pull them out of the productive economy. Why? It's got to be because we think if we have the field life fallow on a crop rotation, it will be more productive when it's planted next year, the following year, and over a long period of time. We are not very good. I was born 9 months to the day after the end of World War II. I am the prototypical baby boomer. Blame it all on me. We have many good traits and many bad traits. Deferred gratification is not one of them. We are in the deferred gratification business socially, both for the students and for society. Many of these outputs are what will these people, these students, what are the successes going to be 20 and 30 and 40 years from now? That is very hard to measure. By the way, we ought to be doing more longitudinal measures of, for example, students who were in our freshman research labs compared to students who weren't 20 years from now. We've got to start getting that more longitudinal data as well. So we're looking for surrogates for that. Immediate life experiences after graduation. What kinds of jobs are they in? What kinds of leadership roles are they in? What kinds of trajectories are they in? Self-assessments of that. And then backing up, degrees in and of themselves aren't, it's not the piece of paper. There's the self-improvement part of the education. But from a social point of view, do we have a more productive, in some sense, leader, better to participate in our democratic culture, et cetera? But degree production, though not the actual output that we're looking for, it's a pretty good surrogate. So you start looking at those things. If I'm being evaluated, or I'm evaluating myself, and I have a little thing on my desk, 5 things I thought were important when I started being president, and at the bottom I say, what have you done today? So in my outputs, I'd call those outputs. So I would judge the outputs of my work month. Have we made progress on the freshman research initiative? Now we have all our, well, not all, a lot of our natural science students in there. I'd call that an output. But I wouldn't call that an output of the university. I'd call that an input. I don't want to get into, mince words, what are outputs and inputs. But those would be outputs for Harrison's and my efforts in this. But ultimately, we want more productive, enriched citizens. And let me say, in the political debate about that, I would consider a very high output of higher education that people, when they're my age, think they have lived more enriched lives because of the experience that they had in college. Now, also that they're more productive, they're better earners, there are a lot of outputs there. But ultimately, those are the outputs, I think, of higher education.
Jim Applegate, Vice President for Program Development here at Lumina. I want to ask, since we have you here, and take advantage of the opportunity, a question that every one of our program officers and directors, everyone at Lumina asks all the time. And you've talked a lot about sustainability in your context, but I want to ask about scale. What are some of the key levers for scale in this? I mean, the big goal requires 22 million more degrees that we're on track to produce. So, and productivity is a key part of getting there. So, I'd be interested in your thoughts within your different communities. How do we think about the levers for scale?
Yeah. I think the problem of scale is, it's another central problem here. We're already a 50,000 student campus. So there's scale on individual campuses. Technology certainly helps. Getting students through in a more orderly way means you still might have 50,000, but more people are going through is an issue of scale. I don't think there's a silver bullet to this, and I would say the Boyer report actually did have a lot of effect. You go and look at undergraduate education at the sort of very selective private and public research universities, and the undergraduate experience is vastly different today than it was in the 80s when Bach and the Boyer report and some of those things were coming out. But there is another element here. I am not a believer that just throwing money at something is going to be the answer. But if, consistent with my point, if we're going to have student success or some of these issues that we're looking at, we got to put our budget behind them. As a culture, as a society, at some level, if this is critical, we got to put our budgets behind it. And K-12, a huge headwind of student success in higher education is they're not coming out of K-12 ready to go. And again, money isn't the only answer to that. But we're not going to go to scale without putting our cultural resources.
Okay, so I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, my name is Louis Soares. I'm with the Center for American Progress. I just want to ask a theoretical question. What if tomorrow federal financial aid, so subsidized student loans and Pell Grants, were based on a formula that would link to your performance with graduating students? How would that change the world that you live in?
Well, we'd get more of it. And other colleges in Texas would get less of it. So in that sense, this would be good news.
For some people.
But then it goes back to the metrics and how we measure that, right? There are other colleges that are taking higher, I don't like the word high-risk students. They're not, but students for whom the rest of their lives, K-12, familiar with college, they have to work. So it's getting the metrics. But I believe, absolutely, just like I said, putting our resources where you get the ROI. If Pell Grants, Texas grants, Chairman Branch is here, we went through that debate. Why shouldn't they be going to the students who are much more likely to succeed? Now, you don't want to profile, you don't want to, that's a very tricky problem. But ultimately, if there's only so much money to go around to support us and to support the students, you want to put it where you get the high rate of return, or people that are working on getting the high rate of return. So in philosophy, I think we ought to do that with all of our resources. Put them where we're going to get the most bang for the buck.